My name's Nicola Berube, and I'm the Director of Sales for AMA Travel, and I'm going to be your host for this evening. I've been in the industry for 30 years myself. Started out as a travel counselor a long time ago, and I'm looking forward to sharing some information with you tonight and going to be sharing some insights and tips and helping guide you in being able to make an informed decision around traveling. And that's whether you're staying here in Canada or whether you're going to be leaving the country. So it goes without saying that travel is a personal choice, and we want to help you have the information that you need to make an informed decision about traveling and to travel confidently when the time is right for you. I want to thank all of you for those who sent in questions in advance. We did receive those, and we've done our best to incorporate a lot of them into the presentation tonight. And we'll be following up at the end of the formal part of the presentation with going through a number of specific questions and answers that we've compiled to help address everything that we received. So thank you again for sending those in. We've planned this event to last about an hour, but we got a lot of questions, and so we might go over a little bit of our time tonight, a little bit longer than an hour, but being respectful of your time, we understand you might need to drop off or you might need to step away, and wanted to let you know that we're going to be recording the session tonight, so we'll be sending you a follow-up email by early next week where we're going to be including this presentation and as well as some links to helpful information that we're going to speak to throughout the slideshow today, and then you'll be able to go back and reference that and utilize those links for more information and more questions that you have. So it might be something you know or maybe not, but AMA Travel's been around providing members with auto travel services, including maps and hotel bookings and road trip advice since the early 1920s. And we actually became a full service travel agency in 1962. We offer all products and services that you could expect from a retail travel agency, from local travel to exotic adventures and round the world cruises and everything in between. It goes without saying that at AMA, we're always there for you, whether it's on the side of the road, if you need a boost or a tow. And the same rings true when you book your trip at AMA Travel. We're going to be there for you before, during, and after your trip. So let's get started. I want to cover off a little bit of information today around the travel landscape and where do we really sit today and what's happening in the environment around us. There's a lot of government advisories that are coming up and down, and those advisories come in different levels, everything from 1 being the lowest to 4 being the highest. And there's implications of things that are impacting that we want to make sure that the government is advising us on what is safe and what is not safe in their recommendations. Government advisories don't necessarily mean that you cannot travel, but it's really around what are the recommendations from the government and why. When you think about vaccination and testing and entry requirements, this has been ever changing. We're coming up 2 years now since COVID started, and it's, really just a volatile environment, you might say, and it's ever changing. And these changes can occur after you've booked your trip, before you've even left on your trip, and they can also change during your trip as well. There's also this heightened likelihood of ongoing changes, and that might be schedule changes, it might be changes to an itinerary that you're booked on, and that's something that we're all having to really adapt our thinking to when we think about what does it look like when we think about traveling and we want to have a stress-free travel experience. There's also this pent-up demand and the impacts to the availability and pricing that's happening in the market as a result of that. We're seeing some suppliers and airlines reduce capacity. We're seeing yet 17 new ships in the cruise line industry expected to come out next year. And it's going to make things different when we think about planning ahead and we think about booking travel. And it's also changing what the advanced booking patterns are from consumers. And it's been well over a decade in my experience in the industry since we've had suppliers like cruise lines releasing their future itineraries 2 and 3 years out so that plan much further ahead, which does a couple of things. It helps us get, clients who are, looking forward to having multiple trips over the next 3 years, have something already on the books and they're planning ahead and getting in early when the prices are low. And, we're trying to forecast what's going to happen in this new landscape as we move forward. There's also this pent up demand and impacts that's also influencing what the travel suppliers are doing around flexible changes and cancellations. So we have a lot of people that would normally be traveling at this time of year, and they're trying to entice people to book. So some things are actually still leaving and departing. We know there's been cruise lines out operating cruise lines since last summer. We have airlines traveling again. We have coach tours traveling again. We also have, packages into the US like Hawaii and Vegas, and the all-inclusive resorts in Mexico are welcoming travelers. So what they're doing is trying to make it really enticing by saying, okay, you can book with a really low deposit and you can have flexible changes or no fee for a one-time change, or you can cancel and get a credit. So this enticement is also changing behavior. And then there's those health and safety protocols. How are we going to keep people safe, and what does that experience look like? So we're going to walk through a few more of the specifics around this. First off, I'm going to start with some travel requirements. And it's really important to understand that the travel requirements for your trip are unique to your trip, and they can change without notice. I know I mentioned that. You're going to hear that a lot from me this evening. And even though the restrictions and requirements might be that one way when you've booked the trip, it's really important to stay aware of changes that could occur before and during your trip. So for the next little bit, I'm going to walk through some of the requirements for traveling in and out of Canada, and specifically to the US, because we got a lot of questions about those in particular. I'm also going to talk a bit about vaccinations, what's required to get on planes, and I'll speak a little bit to exceptions later in the Q&A. And it's also really critical to understand about vaccine types, what's accepted by destinations for transiting countries, and also the type of supplier or travel company you might be traveling with. Cruise lines and tour operators might have specific requirements as well. And beyond that, understanding your COVID test and what type of test is required, not just for where you're going, but also coming home. So we're going to talk about some of those specifics next. So let's start with traveling within Canada. So we've had a lot of people staying close to home, and something that came in late last year is new. Having to have proof of full vaccination to travel by plane, train, and marine vessel is something that we are all experiencing now. And this is for anyone age 12 and older. And yes, well, there might be some exceptions. I'll speak to that a little bit later. For the most part, we're going to have to show proof of vaccine to get on a plane within Canada, or train. And the marine vessel, well, like a ferry or a cruise line, anything that's operating that passenger service. The most important thing to know around travel solely within Canada is there's no current travel advisories. And the travel advisories are what impact your insurance coverage levels. And I'm going to talk in detail in a few minutes about insurance as well. But it's also important to know that provinces have varying health and safety protocols. And what those are could impact your experience depending on where you're going, by city or by province, and it might impact the kinds of plans and activities that you're hoping to partake in. So let's talk next about departing from Canada and going on a trip outside of the province. So this is where same vaccination rules apply, age 12 and older. But now you have to start thinking about what the tests are that are required. A pre-departure negative COVID-19 test is required based on what your destination is. And each destination has different requirements. And we're going to talk about a couple of examples. And then later on in the event, I'm going to show you how you can access some information through our website to give you very detailed information on this. And then adherence to your destinations and your transiting countries' entry requirements is very, very key. Let's look a little bit at returning to Canada. So returning into Canada, this is where that molecular, or often referred to as PCR test, is required. Having a negative test is required for anyone age 5 and older to come into Canada. And these requirements that I'm speaking to today in these examples are specific to Canadian residents and Canadian citizens. If anyone has family coming from other countries that are other citizenships or from specific countries that might have a higher alert on them, there might be more restrictive requirements for coming into Canada, such as quarantine as well. And again, I'm going to show you shortly how to look that up. This also rings true if you're just crossing the US border for that trip that might be less than 72 hours. So, a couple of days in Vegas or a quick drive across for some shopping if you're close to a border town. And so this negative test is now still back in place to be required for anyone over the age of 5. Then there's the ArriveCan app. The ArriveCan app is a system that the Canadian government built to track information and help um, really streamline that arrival into Canada. So understanding what people's vaccination status are, understanding their health status at that moment when they're traveling, and inputting their travelers' information. The quarantine plan is a requirement from the Canadian government to say, we want to know you have a plan in the event that you have to quarantine. And so that's why that is listed as a requirement for entering Canada. And then the proof of full vaccination. Again, getting on a plane, whether you're within Canada, leaving Canada, or coming into Canada, anyone age 12 and older is required to be fully vaccinated. Then there's that on arrival testing piece. We've heard lots about this on the news, and whether it's done at the airport or whether you take a home kit home, and there's lots of different intricacies around this piece. But you can pretty much rest assured you're going to be tested in some way or another for COVID-19 when you arrive in Canada, and it could vary depending on which arrival airport you land in first, depending on what that experience looks like. So let's talk next about entering the US. We got lots of questions around entering the US, and again, different than Canada's rules. So here, proof of full vaccination is required for travelers age 18 and older. And then if you're traveling by plane into the US, you have to have a negative COVID test, but here they allow you to have an antigen test, which is typically less expensive to get and faster to get your results. But that's required for everyone age 2 and older. And then from a timing perspective, this one has to be taken within 1 day of your arrival into the US. So again, everything's very specific by country. And then different by traveling by land into the US, they don't require, at this time anyway, one of those negative tests to cross the border by land. So I'm going to show you a demo of this shortly, but just wanted to let you know that we do have this information in our website. We have what we're calling the AMA Travel Expert Center, as well as frequently asked questions specifically around entry and exit requirements around Canada and the US, and also specifically around insurance coverage. So I'm going to go through the details further as we go through the presentation, but just wanted to remind you all that we do have this information on our website. So let's start talking about testing requirements. So what kind of test that's required by your destination is really important to understand. There could be different kinds of COVID tests, that whether it's the molecular or the antigen test, and it could be different by which cruise line you're traveling on, which tour company you're going on, or which country you're ending up in, and which country you're transiting in. And we're going to show you how to understand that. Understanding the validity of the time frame of your test result is also important. For example, in one of the earlier slides, you saw that the test when you're coming into Canada has to be taken within 72 hours of your departure flight from the country you're leaving from, ready for your trip home. So that doesn't mean 3 days. It means 72 hours specific to the flight departure time. So that means you have to make sure that you've booked your appointment for your scheduled test within that time frame, leading up to your scheduled departure time. Also, it's really the responsibility of the traveler to make sure you received your test result in time. And we have heard of instances, whether it be in the media or even some of our own clients, where the test result wasn't emailed to them on time, and in order for them to be at the airport and checking in for their flight with it. And so it's really important to have a backup plan. in your mind even, okay, if I've got this scheduled and I'm going to try this approach first, then what's my backup plan? Does my airport have a testing facility? Can I pay more money for a rapid PCR test? And these are all things that you're going to want to factor into. Are you willing to take on this amount of work and effort and in some cases stress to be able to take your trip? And I'm going to cover a little bit more later on around things to be prepared for if you do decide to travel. That's one of them. It's also important to make sure that your test has been taken by a company that's approved to provide a COVID-19 test specifically for travel. And, they refer to this often as an accredited facility. You really want to make sure that you're using a pharmacy or that the lab or a specific lab is testing your results. That's how you're going to know that you're meeting that PCR requirement. So we have some recommendations of information where you can get some testing done in Alberta. And what we've put together is just a quick slide here with some pricing of the places that we've sourced information on. And one of the questions we did get in advance of this evening was, is AMA working with anyone like a provider for testing? And I do want to share with you, we actually did try building something with Shoppers Drug Mart, but unfortunately it wasn't something that they and us could find how we could build a common ground for members. But doesn't mean that the conversation will end there. But we are thinking that way and looking at what options we can do. So you see here, there's everything from 1997 for a rapid antigen test at Walmart, which you could use for getting into the U.S., to a PCR test at Shoppers from $40 if you are going to a country that requires a PCR test, as well as some options at the airports as well. Most of these all require an advance appointment. So again, it comes down to that planning, making sure you've booked your appointment well in advance. You don't want to get stuck with not being able to get a test, because that isn't something that would be covered under, reasons to cancel under insurance or things like that. So let's move on now to COVID testing outside of Canada. This becomes more complex. For any of you that are joining us this evening that have traveled over the last 2 years, you'll understand how complex this is. I'm going to share a story about my own travel that I took in a few minutes with you, where I went away in November while we were at the level 2 advisory, and I'll share some of what I've experienced with you and hope that helps you in making some informed decisions and being prepared for the type of experience. So we've put together here a list of recommendations. This is the same information we source for our travel counselors to provide for anyone who's booking with one of our travel counselors. The first one I want to talk about is pharmacy. We've heard a lot that Walgreens and CVS, which are the two most common pharmacies across the US, are offering a PCR or a molecular NAAT test, which is like a rapid molecular test, which is also accepted by Canada, where they're now providing these tests for travelers, so non-US citizens. And we've got reports where they're in most cases not charging for the test. It does require that you book an online reservation in advance. They usually take reservations about 2 to 10 business days before you're trying to get a test, but we also hear they're filling up very, very quickly. So again, it comes down to that planning ahead and making sure that you've got your reservation with enough time to get your test results. The trouble with Walgreens and CVS is they very clearly state that their test result times are not guaranteed. So while they estimate you might have a test result within 72 hours, this is that kind of example where I said you're going to want to have a backup plan. The other thing that you can think about is how can you take a test with you? So some of you who might be Aeroplan members maybe received some marketing from Aeroplan. They're partnering with a company called Switch Health that are selling a portable testing option. Same thing with WestJet and Swoop. They're partnering with a company called Azova. And these companies basically set up a video observation appointment with you where you take this little test kit. You have to order it in advance before you go on your trip, get it delivered to your home and take it with you, one for each traveler. And basically, you don't open it until your video appointment. It must stay sealed. You open it up. I have 2 staff members that tested this late last year. One tested it through a trip he was taking in Mexico City, and one tested it through a trip he had in Florida. And they both worked seamlessly. The key, though, is making sure you have really good internet. okay, because it is a video observation. You're like doing like a FaceTime chat kind of thing. So you have to make sure you have good data internet source when you're doing this, and a mobile device, of course, to do it on. An iPad, laptop, or a phone would work well. So that's another option, and there's some prices there to help, give you an estimate. The next thing is looking at where you're staying. Are you staying at a hotel or an all-inclusive resort that might offer services to help you schedule your test, even though it's a cost, and the cost can vary. Some Vegas hotels are charging upwards of, well, the service that they bring in. It's not the hotel charging, but the service they bring in and do it in your room. They might be charging anywhere from 200 to 300 US per person. If you go into an all-inclusive resort, say in Mexico, we've heard pricing everywhere from 100 US to 200 US per person. And so, there's those options. Your tour company you're booked on, and your cruise line might also have testing options. Some of the cruise lines are doing testing on board still. Some are doing them in the cruise line terminal. But the key there is we've heard of lots of changes. So even though people might have been booking last year for travel coming up, now we're seeing cruise lines starting to say, okay, you know what, we're not going to be doing the testing on board anymore. Here's some recommended pharmacies in the area. So again, always being ready for that constant change and adapting, and making sure that you are okay with accepting that there could be changes. The last thing is the Government of Canada. They have a great list. Not so much within the US and Canada, but other international countries. They have a great list of testing location options on their travel advisory page. So I'd also recommend that, that could be a source of where you might have a look at as well. So next we're going to talk about travel insurance. And I want to talk specifically around travel advisories. And first I want to, maybe just throw out there, you might not know that the status and the comings and goings of a travel advisory can impact your coverage. And the comings and goings could be, the example of late last year when the government reduced the worldwide level 3 travel advisory down to a level 2, and then they brought it back again on December 15th. So, we had almost 2 months without a level 3 advisory, and then it came back again. So that's the coming and going of a travel advisory. Especially when it's on the same topic, which is listed in this one, which is COVID-19. And I'm going to talk through a few things around how do you understand how your insurance policy will react to these changes in the status of an advisory based on the kind of insurance product you bought, because it does vary. It's different for travel medical insurance than it is for a cancellation interruption policy. It also depends on when you bought it and what was the advisory at that time. And did the advisory go down and come back? It also varies depending on when you're traveling. What's the status of the advisory when you're traveling? And is there a new advisory while you're traveling? And what happens then? And I'm also going to answer some questions in the Q&A section that we got specifically on that topic. And then what's excluded? So I can only speak specifically to AMA Travel's insurance policy and how it reacts in an advisory. So I'm going to give you some examples specific to AMA Travel insurance. If you are relying on another type of insurance policy, then you're going to want to make sure that you've checked what those exclusions are and conditions related to that policy. So let's talk about AMA Travels. So we're going to start off with overall coverage. So basically, overall, what you want to think about is, what's the effective date of my insurance policy? When you buy a cancellation insurance policy, it's effective the day you buy it, because that means that now the insurance company is covering you to cancel under one of the insured benefits from that day forward, okay, till the end of till you start your trip, basically, for cancellation. And then most cancellation insurance policies, like AMA Travels does, comes with an interruption benefit and delay benefit if your trip is delayed or it has to be interrupted. And again, there's certain risks that are insured. It's not necessarily everything that you might need, but I'm going to talk about some new coverages that we've added in a moment to help how we've adapted in the post-COVID world for our insurance coverage. And then you've got your travel medical insurance. When you buy just travel medical insurance on its own, its effective date is normally the date you leave your home, the date you leave Alberta, the date you start your trip, okay? And so what the status of the advisory is based on what the exclusion is on the effective date of your policy. And so I'm going to walk you through a couple of examples. If there's a level 3 or 4 travel advisory when you've booked your trip, then in our insurance policy, anything that is listed in a current advisory is excluded from being able to be a reason to cancel and make a claim. So let's put that into a scenario. Right now, there's a level 3 COVID advisory for everything out of Canada. And then on top of that, there's the level 4 cruise advisory that's been in place since early March of 2020. That means that if you book while that current advisory is in effect, means you can't cancel for the reason of that advisory. But with our insurance, if that advisory goes down to a level 2 or 1 after you've booked, and then a new COVID advisory has been added, that becomes a new insurable risk. Our insurance operator is not considering that a known condition. And that's really important and really good news. Most other insurance companies are considering it already a known condition and won't allow coverage to cancel for that. So let's say you're booking a cruise for 2023. You're really planning ahead. And you book it tomorrow, and we have a level 4 advisory for cruising. If that level 4 advisory gets reduced to a level 1 or 2 between now and your trip departure date, and then another new one gets added, the new one would now be an insurable risk to cancel under. So that's something to think about as well. The next piece of the insurance that I want to talk about is interruption coverage. So when it comes to interruption coverage, again, it's based on the status. So interruption coverage is a benefit that you get while you're on your trip. If you're traveling under a current advisory, then that coverage would be excluded for anything listed in the advisory. And an example of that would be if you travel under an active level 3 or 4 COVID advisory and you test positive for COVID in your destination, you wouldn't have delay coverage related to COVID. But if you're traveling when there is no level 3 or 4 COVID related advisory and you test positive, we've added new denied boarding delay coverage. And it's up to $250 per day to a cap of $2,500 per insured on the policy. And it'll help cover expenses for those extra meals and hotels and maybe even your change fee for your ticket to get home. So it'll help cover some of those expenses, but it's only active and in place if you're not traveling under an active level 3 or 4 advisory. So let's talk about medical insurance next, because this is that different one. This is the one that's based on your travel date and when you leave. And is it active when you go? So what we've worked on with our insurance underwriter at AMA Travel is a new endorsement coverage. And our policy still states, we didn't change our policy wording, it still states that anything listed in an active advisory is excluded from coverage. However, in the case of COVID-19, our insurance underwriter has created an endorsement coverage specifically for vaccinated travelers, and more information can be found on our website for details about that. And essentially what it means is if you're traveling under a level 3 advisory, then we will provide coverage if you need medical emergency care related to COVID. For partially vaccinated travelers and insureds, that would be up to 2.5 million. And for fully vaccinated or double dose insureds, then they are covered up to 5 million. Unfortunately, cruising still being at a level 4 and avoid all cruise advisory, this coverage endorsement does not apply to cruises at this time. We don't have any indication that we'd be able to offer that either. With the CDC in America just recently also increasing cruises to level 4, it raises that question again around, when will our government reduce ours? And that's what we're waiting for. So once cruising gets reduced down to a level 3 or lower, then that COVID endorsement coverage will kick in. So let's see, I'll make sure I covered everything here in my notes. I think so. We're going to move on to the next slide and we're going to start talking about the travel experience, what to expect. So when you think about traveling today, for those of you who haven't yet, those of you who have, you've heard this before or experienced it rather. This is really where you're going to have to make sure that you've accepted in every way what the experience is going to be like, what the work effort is going to be like, and be flexible and be ready for change. So we already know we have to be vaccinated and have proof for it. I can share with you, you're likely going to be tested. Your temperature is going to get taken, usually with a, one of those little handheld things they hold up to your forehead or your wrist. And I was just in Mexico. I said I was going to share a bit of my travel story. So I was just in Mexico at an all-inclusive resort last November. And each time we went into the restaurants, whether it was the buffet or the a la carte restaurant for a meal, our temperature was taken and our room number was taken for contact tracing purposes. And it was also, you have to wear your mask indoors in all public spaces as well. All of the staff were exceptional at following all of the staff and the safety protocols, making sure they were wearing their masks, even down on the beach. The staff that are doing the beach activities, the bar service, the beach bar, everyone was wearing their masks even outdoors from a staffing perspective. There was lots of the hand sanitizer everywhere, or if you've been on a cruise ship, the washi, and making sure that everyone was using sanitizer every time they entered into a public facility. And so then the rest of the time when you're at the beach or you're walking on the beach or you're in the pool, it felt very natural, very fun. It was beautiful to be in the warm weather. I'm sure many of you are anticipating being on vacation again. And I'm going to talk a little bit later about what the cruise experience is like. About 25% of the questions that we got from everyone who submitted one, about 25% were related to cruise. And so when we get to the Q&A section near the end, I'm going to talk a little bit more about the cruise experience. But it's, if you're ready and willing to accept all of the steps that come with taking a trip right now, then absolutely we can help you do that. And that's why we're here to talk through this tonight. I'm going to share a little bit more on what we can do and what we do to help people travel confidently in these times. So a few other things to expect, making sure that there could be unexpected flight and schedule changes or itinerary changes to a tour or a cruise. I talked about masks. Sometimes the experiences might be different, but for example, you're going to an all-inclusive resort. The one I went to, they have like 9 a la carte restaurants, and they would rotate each day which ones were open. So maybe 3 this night, 3 different ones the next night. And it's also important, not a lot of the resorts are full right now. They're operating at about 40-50% capacity. Some of the cruise lines are at about 75% capacity. So you just have to go in knowing what is open, what is operating. The gym, for example, at my resort, you had to make an appointment to go and work out. So you have to plan that into your day and and be ready to be flexible again, right? So we got a few more on the next slide. Being prepared for anything to change, including travel regulations. I know I've said it a couple of times. You'll probably hear me say it a few more times tonight. Being well prepared with your documentation. Mexico is an interesting one. They had a lot of different paperwork that was required, like a health questionnaire that was specifically required before entering security, leaving Mexico to come back home. And it's something you download online. You can put it on your phone or you can print it off and fill it out. And so every country seems to have something a little bit different now. Some countries have a very specific approval that you have to get in advance before you can even board your flight. And you have to show that you have approval by that government to come into their country. Singapore would be a good example of that. I think I've covered most of this now. Well, the last bullet I do want to talk about, this was something that we talked about when we traveled to Mexico, is what happens if someone in your group tests positive and can't come home on the plane as scheduled? Are you all going to stay in the destination? Are the rest of you going to go home? These are important discussions to have if you're traveling with other people. So some of the things to consider before you book. And I say before you book because we really want to make sure that people are making a good informed decision that's right for them. Are you comfortable with your plans changing? Have you considered your personal health and those of the health around you? Are you coming back to aging parents or baby grandchildren? Can you adhere to the restrictions where you're going? Are you going to be comfortable with their restrictions? Have you made plans with your job or your family or even your pets in the event you get delayed in your destination? And do you understand fully what that insurance covers, what's excluded relative to COVID-19? And are you okay to accept that? And have you factored in that possible isolation or quarantine times if you do test positive in your destination and can't come back? And, are you ready to just accept what that experience looks like, which could be anything from, be if you go back to the same hotel or resort you were staying at, might not be as nice a room, or you might not be allowed to leave your room. You might be having room service meals, and, quarantined, literally staying in your room and for the quarantine period. It can be anywhere from 10 to 15 days, depending on when you test negative for COVID following that. And then a few more to cover is, can you accommodate the requirements for everywhere you'll be traveling? Understanding the connecting cities is a really big one, or ports of call. If you're going on a cruise, do you meet what that port is looking for accommodating their requirements? And are you comfortable with the COVID-19 situation? What are the case counts like where you're going? Are you okay? And have you monitored that and looked at that? And do you have a plan in case you should contract COVID-19 around those expenses? And at least think about it in advance. I know that's what I did, and really tried to understand, okay, we said, all right, if one of us tests positive, the other one's going home, and we'll figure it out, right? So you have to have those tough conversations. And are you okay with the change in cancellation policies for each of the components you booked for your trip? If it's non-refundable, if you do cancel, will you have an option for an insurance claim, or is it going to be excluded because of COVID based on when you bought the policy and the effectiveness of an advisory at that time? Or will you get a credit? And are you okay with receiving a future travel credit, either if the supplier cancels or if you decide to cancel and it's not an insurable reason? So those are most of the core things to think about. But if you do decide to take an upcoming trip, then here's a couple of tips. Want to make sure that you have your documentation ready to go. So check your passports now. Get your Nexus card if you haven't already. I believe I heard they are taking applications again, or if it's expiring, make sure you renew it before it expires. Otherwise, the reapplication process is a bit cumbersome again. I mentioned that local government approval for entry. So make sure you've checked. Does that country require that you have government approval to come in? And I also recommend that you do that before booking. Some of them have a 30 to 90-day wait period for those applications. And do you have the right vaccination documentation? I'm going to talk about that in the Q&A shortly. Have you downloaded the ArriveCan app? You can play with it a little bit before you go. Make sure it's working on your device, and make sure you have a device with a good data plan, because I recommend you don't rely on free Wi-Fi at a hotel. Or free Wi-Fi anywhere. I tried that. It does not work well. It wouldn't let the ArriveCan app save everything. It wouldn't let me receive the test results via email. So, I did in the end have to work with the concierge at the hotel for them to get my test results and print it off for me. So it was a good learning experience for me, and I'm happy I can share some of these tips with you today. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit now, get a little bit more of the fun stuff, traveling confidently with AMA Travel. And I'm going to walk through, certainly some of the member benefits and reasons to book with AMA Travel. You may know some of these already. Maybe some are new. We did launch one of these new ones, was launched early last year. So I hope it goes without saying, but if you don't know, we have expertly trained Alberta-based travel agents, and a lot of our travel agents have been in the industry for many, many years. They have oodles of experience. We invest a lot in our counselors by sending them to destinations, sending them on experiences, and depending on what you're looking for, we can work with you to determine which is the best specialist for you to meet with. And going on our website is a great place to see where our counselors have gone and where they specialize in. We have all of their profiles there, and their biographies around what they specialize in, and it's a really fun place just to even go and noodle around and feel it out, see if you connect with someone that way. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how you can book appointments with our counselors a little bit later on here as well. We also have a website. So if you don't know this already, amatravel.ca, it's an extremely competitive retail travel agency website, very comparable to an Expedia as an example. And we want to make sure that as a member, you know that when we offer member benefits and offers, that you also get those through booking online. But not just that, you get the backing of AMA Travel when you book online with us. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute as well. You get the best price guarantee on hotels in North America and vacation packages booked online. We also launched early last year a $100 travel credit for Premier members. So for those of you who are joining us tonight and are Premier members, if you didn't hear about that, it's a great way to help offset the costs of one of your trips. And any of our counselors can give you information on how to redeem that. We also offer free passports with passport photos, I should say, with select AMA memberships. Our Plus and Premier members receive one free passport photo per year. I know you don't need one every year, but sometimes you need them for visas. So that also applies for visa photos as well, depending on the destination you're going to. And then members also save 10% on travel medical insurance. And that's not even the end of the list. We have a few more on the next slide too. Our luggage and accessories. We purposefully give our members an exceptional discount off of the MSRP rate, which is usually the regular retail sales pricing, and so up to 30% off, and even more sometimes when we have sales on for luggage and accessories that you might need for your upcoming trips. We have exclusive member rates and member benefits on cruises and tours, and exclusive rates on car rentals and hotels, as well as Disney tickets, Alberta ski tickets, and Parks Canada passes. So lots of member value. And next, we're going to talk about why you might want to use a travel agent. Some of you might already have a favorite travel agent at AMA. And if not, I want to, just provide a little bit more detail on why working with a travel agent might be a good option for you. But like I said, we also have a website. So if you prefer to book online, if you prefer to do your own dreaming and research online, we have that. And I'm going to cover off in a few more moments some great details. We even have a little demo to share with you about some of the enhancements we've put in our website. So first off, the research and expertise, and having an experienced specialized travel agent is key if you want someone else to do all of that heavy lifting for you, if you want someone else to use their expertise to give you recommendations based on their experiences, if you want that person to do all of the work relative to your documentation, this is the main reason why you would use a travel agent, at least at the beginning stage. But don't forget, we're there for you through the whole process. So while we're going to save you some time and money, and we're going to make sure that you're protected with the right insurance coverage, we're also going to be there to support you before, during, and after your trip. And the key that you're really going to find by working with a travel agent is what we experienced after COVID hit. And this is really where the travel counselors, I can tell you, they earned their value. And they are still earning their value. We have not very many people traveling right now, but we have lots of people booking and planning ahead. And so when you're thinking about all those long hold times with the airlines, or getting refunds, or bringing people home safely, this is why you need a travel counselor. They are there to help you. But if you decide to book online with AMA Travel, we're going to support you if you need us. So same thing, anyone who booked online with us and COVID hit and we needed to help bring them home too, they didn't get treated any differently than when someone booked through one of our travel agents. And I think that's a really important point when you think about where are you going to decide to book your next trip and why. So I welcome you to meet one of our travel counselors and talk about that if you've not used one of them in the past, because I've worked at AMA coming up 19 years, and like I said, I've been in the industry for over 30. Started as a travel counselor myself, and it's something that gives me a great sense of pride to know what a great job our travel counselors do for our customers. Let's see here. So I'm going to just move on, I think, just for the sake of time here. We're coming up to 47 minutes in the presentation, and I want to share some things with you about what some of the amazing work that our marketing and our digital member experience team have done to enhance our website and build some tools for consumers. We recognized early on, especially once, once the insurance claims were done and once everybody, was sort of, settled in on whether they got a future travel credit or not, consumers then really wanted to understand, how do I get this information at my fingertips? Like, what do I need to do now when I want to travel in a COVID world and during a pandemic? And what does that mean? And so AMA created the AMA Travel Expert Center on our website. And this is really a great tool. Well, there are lots of links and lots of information. It's very comprehensive. And so what we've tried to do is serve it up in a way for you to be able to have access to it, because like I said, these things can change frequently. So certainly if you book online or if you've booked somewhere else and you want to utilize this information, of course, this is here for you as well. And everything from frequently asked questions to links to the government advisories, understanding travel restrictions and requirements, travel insurance, and also some recent articles. We've been spending a lot of time trying to determine, what do members want to hear about? What are the questions? And we are actually going to use a lot of the information that we've learned from the questions many of you submitted prior to this event on what other content do we need to create to make sure that we're helping all of our members have this information. So you see at the bottom left there our address to the Expert Center. You'll receive it in the link when you get the copy of the recording later this week and early next week. And yeah, excited for you to test it out. So let's have a look at what does this look like. And we're going to show a little video here. And this is a look of what is the new Expert Center on amatravel.ca. So we're going to go ahead and play that. So the first section you see here that's being highlighted are some various travel styles, and those are things you can browse through. But most importantly is the destinations restriction map. And so this section here of the website is really where you're going to be able to populate where you're going, look up specific information around the country that you're going to or transiting through, and understand what are their entry requirements, including those specific to COVID. And we're going to show you this little example here for a flight from Edmonton to Amsterdam. So you put in your itinerary of where you're going. If you had a connection, you'd select the connection section. This one's a nonstop one. And then once this comes back with the results, you can open up each section to understand, what are the requirements, what are the restrictions, and what do I need to enter the country, what documentation is required. So we're really excited to partner with a company called Sherpa. That's where this map is from, and it's quite encompassing. But the only thing it doesn't have is the Canadian of Government Travel Advisories, and so we have a separate link for that. You do have to look at both in combination with each other, because they are very different things, right? And like I said, impacts your insurance very, very differently. So we welcome your time to go in and poke around and play with that. So next we're going to go into the question and answer section of our presentation tonight. And I have my friend Erin from our marketing team who is going to help me. And I am just going to pull up my section here. So Erin, are you there?
Hi,
Hello.
yes.
All
So yeah, we
right.
got some amazing questions from everyone, and hopefully we
Good.
can answer everything this evening. Obviously, if not, please feel free to reach out to us if we can't, if your answers didn't get questioned and if your questions didn't get answered or you can't find it on the site. But here, what happens if if I'm medically exempted from being vaccinated? Can I still travel, and what do I need to know?
Well, that's a great question. And, I've seen this come up in the news, where people have shown up with a letter and have and then they have a hard time getting on their plane. So here's the thing. Some airlines, yes, they do accept medical exemptions, but they have an application process, and many of those have to be completed and approved well in advance of your flight. So what we recommend is that you either through your travel agent, or if you're booking on your own, then then understanding what is that airline's requirements and applying for that process before you buy your tickets. Some of them can be 2 weeks or longer for that application to come back with an answer, and it may not be approved. So, if you don't want to risk having an issue with your ticket, then we recommend that you do that before you buy your ticket. Hope that answers that question. We'll go on to the next one.
Great. I heard that if you have COVID and you don't have to get a PCR test to travel to and from the US within 90 days of getting COVID. Is that true?
That's another good question. And I pulled the information directly from the government websites. So I'm going to talk about the US first and then Canada. So I guess the short answer is, yeah, it's kind of true. So really, this is how the US says it on their website. It states currently that having documentation that you've recovered from COVID-19 in the last 90 days before boarding your flight to the US would be sufficient in place of a negative antigen test. So what they describe as documentation of recovery from COVID-19 is maybe a little bit more work for you to get. So that's in the form of a positive COVID-19 viral test taken on a sample no more than 90 days before departure, and you must also, in conjunction with that, have a letter from a licensed healthcare provider or public health official stating that the passenger has been cleared for travel. So that is an approach you could take, or you could go to Walmart or Shoppers Drug Mart and have the antigen test done the day before you go. So either of those two options will work. Now for entering Canada, again, different country, different rules. So the government website for Canada currently states that if you are now symptom-free and you can provide proof of a positive COVID-19 molecular test, so that's that PCR test, when crossing the border or boarding your plane instead of a negative test. And here's the rules around that one. This test must have been taken at least 11, but no more than 180 days before your initial scheduled departure time of your flight or your scheduled entry into Canada by water or by land. And so what they're saying is the proof of the positive test must be in the form of an accepted type of molecular or PCR test. And if your proof is accepted, you would not have to do the on-arrival test or the test on day 8 after your arrival. So all of that said, here's the thing I want to leave you with when you're flying. It's important to understand that the airlines are the ones who are administering and interpreting the rules, because they're the ones who have to validate that you have it before you get on the plane. We have heard instances where people have had trouble using this approach. But I hope that answers the question. We'll go on to the next one.
Great. So if I've had COVID and now I'm trying to travel, will I test positive for COVID again? How does that work?
Well, we have heard this. Yeah, we've heard that people have tested positive long after recovering from COVID. However, we're not medical professionals, so I can't really answer the question if you will test positive for COVID or not. But you know what? It's a great question to speak with your healthcare professional about.
All right. So now I've booked a vacation, but I'm concerned about the changing situation and our resort is limiting the restaurants and the facilities. Would this be a valid reason to cancel and get a refund?
Well, this is a good question, and I know I touched on this briefly in the presentation, but here's what it comes down to. If you have a concern about the type of experience you're going to have or what amenities might be operating where you're going, or if you're just really concerned about your safety relative to COVID, or you're uncertain about the changing situations, none of those are insurable risks under travel cancellation insurance policies. But that said, maybe you've booked with a supplier that had a flexible change or cancellation option at the time when you booked. So you might be able to delay your trip by making a change. You might be able to cancel it. But most likely in those types of scenarios, you're probably going to end up with a credit from the supplier. So if you're okay with that, then that's probably where we're at right now, because that's most of what the suppliers have been doing over the last 2 years. Doesn't mean it's going to continue that way. So it's really best to check with who you booked with, and if you booked with a travel agent, they can absolutely assist you with understanding your options.
All right, so we received a large number of questions specifically talking about cruising during an active level 3 or 4 advisories. Can you speak to the current restrictions relative to cruising? So, such as if I've already had a cruise booked, what happens if the government does not remove the advisory?
Well, if they don't remove the advisory, you have a couple of choices you need to make. So they basically the choices are, do you go anyway? Do you accept everything that I've kind of walked through earlier in the presentation today? Or do you decide to postpone, change your date to a later travel date? Does your supplier let you do that, who you're booked with? Or do you have the option to cancel and get a credit? So it all comes down to what were the terms and conditions when you booked, and what are the terms and conditions at the time that you cancel?
And what are my options for travel insurance if I'm taking a cruise during the active advisory?
That's a good question. And so AMA travel insurance will cover you for non-COVID related benefits as outlined in our policy. But like I said earlier, when there's a level 4 advisory, we don't offer that medical endorsement coverage for COVID. And anything related to COVID around cancellation or interruption coverage under both a level 3 or 4 advisory would be excluded. But rest assured, if you do decide to go and you take AMA travel insurance, everything non-COVID related is still encompassed and covered under the policy terms and conditions. Now, there are some insurance providers that are not excluding COVID under the current level 4 advisory. From a medical insurance option, you might want to explore Medipack, and making sure that you check with them, like what are their service levels and coverages like? I can't really speak to that level of detail, but I have heard that they are not excluding COVID under a level 4 advisory.
What are we hearing the experiences like on board?
Well, this is a fun story. So we've had quite a few of our Canadian sales representatives from cruise lines that are our contacts, so that we understand what offers are in place and we do our agent training with. And we've had a lot of them traveling in the last 3 months, and they have been getting out on the seas and on the river cruises to experience the product and come back and report back to our staff and host many travel sessions with us. So virtual sessions like this, which can be found on our website. I'll talk about that in a minute if you want to hear more about specific experiences on board. While each cruise line has a little bit different approach, they were mandated by the American CDC to have very specific health and safety protocols. And so there's quite a consistent approach when it comes to health and safety. So, while you can probably rest assured, you're going to be having to wear a mask and get your temperature checked, and you're going to be tested randomly. The rest of the experience is relatively unchanged. And, while there are some cases in the news, and if you Google it, it's pretty easy to see, where there are COVID cases on board some ships, there has been some impact to ports of call. I would say that's probably the biggest experience. So while it's, if it's not as important to you, if a port doesn't get called on, then maybe it's okay, right? So you have to, again, make a personal decision that's right for you. But what you do need to know that if you do test positive, or someone you're traveling with tests positive, you will most likely be quarantined to your cabin until the end of the cruise, and possibly your traveling companions as well. So that's important to think about, that quarantine piece if you test positive. Not much unlike if you go, to an all-inclusive resort or even to Vegas, right? Same kind of approach, except you're bobbing about on the ocean and having really nice food in your cabin.
What are the testing requirements? Are they different, the same? I know with, the US, they have some different rules for the cruises.
Yeah, so it can be different by destination. That's right, Aaron. So, some of the cruise lines leaving the US had to have different testing rules than, say, a cruise leaving in the Mediterranean, and so, or even through Asia. So, this is going to vary by cruise line and by destination. This information can easily be found on each of the cruise lines' websites, or if you're booking a cruise with an AMA travel counselor, they'll absolutely walk you through those requirements.
All right. So lots of insurance questions too
Okay.
here. So if I purchase an annual policy and now there's a government advisory and I'm not going to be traveling, can I get a refund?
That's a good question. We had that question a lot following COVID. And in the onset of COVID, our insurance underwriter back in March 2020 did make a couple of exceptions for some refunds at that time for policies that had been purchased within a short period of time. or if the effective date had not passed yet. So remember I said that effective date is based on when are you first traveling. Well, it's the same on an annual multi-trip policy. There's always a start date. When does the coverage start? So if that policy has passed that date, then it is non-refundable. And that's regardless of whether it's been traveled on or not. The good news is that the annual policy continues to include unlimited trips within Canada, and there's also that new virtual at-home video call coverage with up to 4 calls per insured that was added after COVID began. So if you need more information on that coverage or what your multi-trip policy, annual policy continues to cover you for, either one of our AMA travel counselors can support answering those questions, or we also have some great articles on our website about this as well.
Great. Okay. So do I need the QR code to travel? And if I do, where do I get it?
Yes, absolutely. The vaccination QR code is required for travel, and late last year, the Alberta government updated the QR code to be compliant with the Canadian government version of that. I think the difference was they put the Canadian government logo on it, but I'm not entirely sure. But essentially what it means is, yes, you must have this updated QR code. So if you printed one some time ago, you do need to get the new one. And you can print that and download it from the Government of Alberta website at covidrecords.alberta.ca. Or if you Google it, get my QR code for traveling in Alberta, or get my QR code for traveling, it'll come up in your results. You can click on it from there as well. The other thing that we heard is, what about my name matching on the QR, on the vaccination QR information? Because middle name is often there, but sometimes it's not on your passport. And we have heard that there's an issue with this. And we've heard of travelers having trouble or being denied boarding a flight because the names didn't match the passport on their vaccination. So if that's the case, we would recommend that you have your passport updated to include your full legal name.
All right. So, I mean, I think we all have the itch. We're ready we've been dreaming for the last few years now, but how far can we book out? When should we, what's a good time to start thinking about booking now?
Well, if you're anything like me, I always like to have something on the books to look forward to. So, it's been a tough 2 years for any of us in the travel industry. We're used to traveling. We live for it. It's in our blood, right? And so many of you that are joining us tonight, I imagine, feel the same way because that's why you're here tonight. And so, yeah, we've all got the itch. You got that right, Erin. And really, it's going to depend on what you're booking. You might want to book quite far out in advance. I talked earlier about the cruises, for example. Here's the key thing to note. The Americans pretty much been acting like COVID doesn't exist. I think we've all seen that on the news. They've been booking travel ongoing. And nothing really changed. They didn't have this stall or this break, because even though they had some CDC requirements and things like that, people were still booking. And so what we've seen is that capacity has been filling up, and now we've got this pent up demand that's going to come as soon as our advisories are lowered again, whether it's the level 3 worldwide one or whether it's the cruise one is lowered. This pent up demand is going to drive a quick rebound, and just like it did, much like on October 21st when the last advisory was reduced. And so what you want to be mindful of is, where can you secure space with a low deposit amount, or with a supplier offering a flexible change or cancellation option? And again, are you okay with ending up with a credit if the trip doesn't go as planned or if you have to postpone? So my recommendation is you should book out as far as you can for what you're looking to do. So if you're looking to take a cruise, we have itineraries launching in certain destinations up through 2024 now. And this is unheard of. Like I said earlier, it's been decades since we've had cruise lines release their inventory this far out. And maybe just to explain a little bit about why that is, once we had the number of cruise ships in market that we have today, whether it's on the rivers or on the ocean, it became important for them, from a business perspective, to manage their yield. And what that means is they were trying to fill one year before they released the next year. Well, that's kind of gone out the window now. And quite frankly, I like it, because I like being able to see and help our customers see what they can plan 2 or 3 years out. So cruises, absolutely. If you're looking at going later this year or in the next 2 years, I recommend you start getting something on the books now. If you're looking for an all-inclusive sun destination, we're rather optimistic that we might have a late season this year once the level 3 advisory gets lifted. even though some of the suppliers are reducing capacity a bit. So those, book when it's right for you if you're going to go in the next few months. But anything that you're looking for 6 months or out further, I recommend you start getting on that now.
All right, one last question here. What
Okay.
happens if we're traveling out of the country and a change is made to the Canadian travel advisories?
Yeah, I had to think about this one a little bit and interpret what I think the question might be referring to. So I'm going to answer it this way, but I encourage anyone, if it doesn't answer the question, please reach out to us and we'll do what we can to answer it. So I took this to be what happens to my medical insurance coverage, because really that's the biggest impact that you need to think about. And the way you need to think about it is if you decide to extend your trip and stay longer and you buy an extension to your insurance policy, it means whatever is now listed in that advisory will not be covered as an insurable benefit during the extension period because it's what's considered already a known issue. So if that's not what the question was about, I apologize. But feel free to reach out to me.
All right. Well, that's all we have for questions. But yes, again, of
Okay.
course, if people have additional questions, drop them in the chat or send us an email, and we'll do our best to answer everybody's question.
Excellent. Okay, well, we're about to wrap up here, and we're not doing too bad on time. We're about 8 minutes behind schedule. I want to talk a little bit about how to reach us, and this is our last slide today. So, you've got 4 different ways that you can, meet with us, talk to us, book with a travel counselor. I talked about the doing it on your own if that's what you like to do with the website, and you might even, maybe book your quick, you know, hotel getaway to Banff on the website and want to book your world cruise with a travel counselor. And there's those different options for you to go back and forth between the ways to connect with us. I absolutely recommend that you book an appointment if you're thinking of booking with one of our travel counselors. I'm sure you can imagine counselors are in higher demand now than they were pre-COVID. It's a confusing world out there to travel, and our counselors are ready and willing to help people, but they are busy. And so while you can walk into an AMA center, it's likely that our counselors are going to be booked with appointments. So unless it's something that's like a quick service item, like a passport photo or a ski ticket or an insurance policy or things like that, then I recommend if it's any sort of trip planning that you definitely make an appointment with a counselor in advance so it's at a time and a date that works for you. And as I said, you can visit our website and search out our counselor profiles there and find an agent near you. You can look at their calendar and availability and book that all online, make it super easy for you. Or you can also connect with us by phone. So connecting with us by phone is a great option if you are looking for like an insurance quote or you're looking for a car rental or a hotel that you don't want to book online yourself. We also do phone appointments for trip planning, and coming soon in the next couple of months, we will also be launching virtual appointments. You won't even have to leave the comfort of your living room or your kitchen table. You'll be able to do your trip planning right from the comfort of your home with one of our travel specialists. So we're super excited about that too. So that's really all we have tonight, and I just want to thank everyone so much for joining us. And I hope you all have a great rest of your evening. And I look forward to hearing travel stories from you on either our social media channels or through our travel counselors. And expect that we will hopefully all be traveling confidently soon. So thank you again for joining us, and have a great evening.